Hello, gentlemen and ladies. My name is Calvin. Today I'll talk a little bit about my experience learning iOS. I am not a trained programmer. I used to be a chemical engineer, and after that a refrigeration engineer, and I essentially learned programming, picking up PHP and Python as my first languages. So this is iOS is a little level up for me, and I would like to share my experiences with you. So this is a little bit about me. I used to work for a local company, and we designed scientific freezers, minus 80 degrees Celsius, one compressor pulling the other compressor to bring the inner temperature of the freezer down to minus 80. It's not the same as your home refrigerator. It's for scientific purposes, where you store red blood cells in it. So this is a little bit about my background. As I started my own software company after I left the company, the freezer company, I have a small team of 3 to 5 engineers. A couple of my partners came and left along the way over the past 4 years, and some interns in my company. I learned a great deal about programming, how to make my program more robust, how to implement continuous integration, how to implement test-driven development, and essentially grew a reasonably professional software outfit, specializing primarily on web development. So that's a little bit of my background. And because of my science-related background, I love doing apps that relates to the science world. I also have customers from universities, one of which is University of Southern California, and the other one is ETH Zurich. We do science-related web apps for them. Half of my business comes from universities, and the other half comes from consumer apps, your usual startups and lifestyle apps. So that's a little bit of my background. I also tried my own product startup, but apparently I'm not a very good consumer app kind of guy. And one of the biggest mistakes I made in that little product startup was that we chose to go phone gap. And because that image was very, that product was very image intensive, requiring me to actually retrieve and display lots of images, phone gap simply wasn't up to it. So it later on, after the failure, I realized that I have to learn Objective-C. It wasn't something that was optional, and so that's where I went into. And despite all the controversy of Objective-C being very hard to learn and convoluted, I actually found that, well, if you try to adapt your thinking, you can actually figure out why that language is written in such a way. So this is where I am right now, and I'm going to attempt a new Objective-C iPhone app very soon, because we are building an academic conference web app, which is not to be confused with Eventbrite. It is a specific conference app that deals with paper submissions, reviewing of papers for the academic world. It's not Eventbrite, it's not Amiendo, it's a very niche specialized software. So, yeah. How many of you here have actually done iOS development before? Cool. Quite a number. And the rest, are you guys beginners? How many beginners, complete beginners here? Okay, cool. Oh, great. Okay, I'm glad that you're here. I would love to share some thoughts of what I think about learning iOS with you, and hopefully we can learn along the way. Okay, I'm still a learner, so first of all, 3 weeks. That's the title of my talk, right? Why so kanchiong? Well, obviously because we are living in the real world, we want to produce something quickly, we want to get to market quickly, we want to start earning revenues quickly. That's why we need to build our software quickly. So that's one of the reasons, of course. But frankly speaking, if you have been reading up on what all the software developers, all the experienced software engineers and software developers in the software programming world are talking about, any skill, any form of skill, and software creation is a craft. It takes a long time to become good at it. So yes, you can build something simple in 3 weeks, but it is a long journey towards building a full-blown robust app. Yes, you can get something quick to the market, and there are good reasons for that. And I'll share with you the 2 perspectives of that along the way. And we will also do a bit of deep dive into some basic concepts of what iOS programming is all about. Things like delegation, things like message passing, versus the standard method call, which we all know from the more contemporary language like Ruby, like Python, like PHP. So before we really get into this 3 weeks and produce an app, you must also understand that this is the context. A small amount of knowledge can actually mislead people into thinking that they are more expert than they really are. So while we can produce something simple in 3 weeks, you must always have a beginner's mindset and always try to learn more. And that essentially is my philosophy. Okay, a lot of people have mentioned this. This is another guy, way before Alexander Pope. This anonymous fellow called AV in a piece of old ancient paper say this. And if you have a little bit of knowledge, you think you're damn good, but actually, if you know more, you realize that you know very little. And of course, Hippocrates has a very, very famous saying, which is, life is short, this is Latin. The craft long, opportunity fleeting, which is why we need to get to market fast. Experiment treacherous, you're going to fail, okay? And it's part of the journey. And judgment difficult. And of course, that's the Western philosophy. In the Eastern world, we have our equivalent, Lao Tzu in 604 BC Zhou dynasty. To realize that you do not understand is virtue, and not to realize that you do not understand is defect. So you must always know what you know, and have a good idea where your knowledge gaps are, and keep seeking to plug your knowledge gaps. Okay, I get it, right? I think enough of this quotes and deep philosophy. So are we going to change the title at the top? We're not going to produce an app in 3 weeks after all. Well, of course not, because the other perspective is that evolutionary superiority triumphs technical superiority. While you can be a very good developer, and I know a lot of very good developers, they are actually not successful in the market, while some other business guys, are actually much more successful in the market. So just because you are technically competent doesn't mean that, hey, you're going to have the best app in the world. You need to understand different perspectives, and you need to choose the correct perspective based on where you are in a given context. So, Derek Sivers, how many of you are familiar with this guy called Derek Sivers? Okay. Some of you guys might have read his blog posts, heard about what he did with CD Baby, which he exited with 22 million. He was an entrepreneur. He was also a self-taught programmer, essentially. And he grew a company and basically sold it for 22 million. He's in Singapore nowadays. He's based in Singapore, but he travels a lot from what I understand. So adopt a growth mindset. And what is this growth mindset all about? Right? Growth mindset means that you think that, well, it's all about talent. You have a talent for programming or you don't. I don't think so. I think if you are of above average intelligence and you are willing to put yourself through it, you're able to inculcate interest and pick up the skill. Like anything else, it's all a skill and you need to practice. So the growth mindset gives you the perspective that, hey, anyone can master anything. Just because you're a business guy doesn't mean that you can't learn programming. Derek Sivers was a pure musician and a business guy. He was trying to sell music, and he didn't know nothing about programming. But he taught himself how to do it over 7 years. And after 7 years of, well, ups and downs, he finally managed to exit successfully. So unlike all the wonderful articles that you see on TechCrunch, making you believe that success is overnight, often there's a long story behind it. And a business guy or even a technical guy might learn business skills, and a business guy might learn technical skills and eventually make something good out of this company, especially in this industry. So come at me, bro, right? Give me whatever problems and I'll put myself to solve it. So fixed mindset, no bending allowed. Okay, so this is just a quick one before we move on to the technical bits.
There's an audio jack. There's an audio jack and a projector.
Okay, I learned a new thing today. One more time.
System audio.
I'm often invited to speak at conferences full of famous, successful people. They're all leaders of some sort. People look up to them. They're acclaimed and accomplished. They have a great reputation. Their struggling years of failure are behind them. And that's the problem. When you're green, you grow. When you're ripe, you rot. If you're not failing, you're not learning. So let's take a lesson from this and talk about 3 big reasons why you need to fail. First, if you're not failing, you're not learning. You know, the way you build muscle in a gym is you do something a little out of your capability so that the tiny little muscle fibers actually tear. Then, as they repair themselves, they rebuild a little stronger and a little bigger to adapt. That's why they say no pain, no gain, and it's the same with the brain. Look at these 2 sets of words for a few seconds. The second set is intentionally missing a letter in each word. So take 10 seconds to read both sides, okay?
This is important.
So tests show that when quizzed afterwards, people remembered 3 times as many words from the second column, the one that was missing letters. It's like when you saw the words with the blank spaces, you struggled with it for just a second, then you figured it out. But that 1 second of struggle made all the difference. To learn something effectively, you must make mistakes and pay attention to those mistakes. So let's look at a similar test. Everyone was given a paper with some facts. Group A studied the paper for 4 separate sessions. Group B studied only once, but then was tested 3 times and shown their mistakes after each test. A week later, both groups were tested, brought back and tested again. Group B scored 50% higher than Group A. That means that they had studied 1/4 as much, but learned far more. So making mistakes, being in over your head and failing, this is proven to teach better than lots of advanced preparation. This is not just for memorizing, but for anything. Practicing music, for example. I went to Berklee College of Music, and our music teacher taught us that if what we're doing in the practice room sounds good, then it's not practice. Now I get what he meant. So some students would just play what they know, start to finish. If I was in the practice room, sometimes I could hear the student in the next room just playing everything start to finish perfectly. But then one time I was in the practice room next to one of the best musicians in school, and I was surprised to hear that everything coming out of his practice room just sounded like short phrases that making lots of mistakes each time, like so lots of mistakes, focusing on tiny little phrases. So doing what you know is fun, but it doesn't improve you. The most effective way to improve at anything is to find what you're not good at, to find the painful, the difficult activities that will make you better, then do those things over and over again until you've got it. If you're interested in this, there are 2 great books about it. The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle, and Talent is Overrated by Jeff Colvin. So, Michael Jordan, basketball legend, your turn.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed.
So that's the first point, learning.
Okay, so reason number 1, why you need to fail. It's because if you're not failing, you're not learning. But it would be a shame for you to think these are just little academic experiments, like, okay, I'll remember that next time I need to memorize word pairs. So instead, try to extrapolate this to your real life. Deliberate practice to improve skill is a fact. It's a neurological reality. So knowing that, how would you apply this to your life? If you just keep doing what you're good at, you're coasting. You've plateaued. You need to make a real effort to fail more. But a voice inside you is probably saying, failure is not an option. You're the top in your field. You can't throw away a career of hard work. You have a reputation to protect. You have an image to uphold. You have an impeccable track record. People would lose respect for you, right? Well, let's look at a very big deal. Fixed mindset versus growth mindset. People with a fixed mindset think that talent comes from an ingrained level of ability. They think, I'm good at this, or I'm not good at this. They see it as fixed, that you either are or you aren't. Some people are born artists, some people are born leaders. Some people are just good with numbers and some aren't. People with a growth mindset think that with hard work, anyone can master anything. They think, I got it because I worked hard at it. They see the starting point as moot. It doesn't matter if someone took to a skill a little more naturally at a young age. Absolutely anyone can catch up and surpass the so-called naturals. So 2 big reasons why this matters. Number 1, the fixed mindset hurts you. There was a 2-part test given to a bunch of students. The first part was intentionally easy, and the second part was impossibly hard. So it created a situation of initial encouragement, then certain failure. After each person failed the test, they were asked what they planned to do before the next test. Those with a growth mindset said they would study harder for the next test. Those with a fixed mindset said they would study less for the next test. After all, this is something they're obviously just not good at, so why waste their time? So reason number 2 why this matters, parents, pay attention here, is where this mindset comes from. If a child is told well-meaning things like, you're so smart, you're a brilliant child, you're so great at this, you have always been a math whiz, then it forms the fixed mindset view of the world. But instead of praising the person, if they're praised on their effort, like telling them, you must have worked really hard, or let's look at how to improve that, then that forms a growth mindset view of the world. So what's fascinating is that it can be changed in an instant. So remember this 2-part test, right? So it starts very easy and gets impossibly hard. Now, they did an experiment to see how a simple 6-word comment would affect their score if somebody were to take this test twice, a 6-word comment given to them after the first time. So randomly, half were praised for their effort. They were told, you must have worked really hard. The other half was praised for their intelligence. You must be smart at this. That was it, just a 6-word comment after the first test before the second. Those that were praised for their effort improved their initial score by 30% when taking it the next time. But those that were praised for their intelligence had their score decline by 20% in the second test, all because of 6 short words. So to me, this is a huge point. People with a fixed mindset who think, I am good at this, I'm just good at this, they collapse in the face of failure. If you're interested in this, please read Carol Dweck's great book called Mindset, and Josh Waitzkin's book called The Art of Learning. So why is this so important for my successful audiences? It's because they're constantly being praised for being brilliant. Once somebody is successful, everyone starts to tell them, oh, you're a genius filmmaker, or you're a natural artist. Even if you didn't used to believe that stuff, it's hard not to when you're being praised every day. So no wonder they don't want to fail. It would threaten not just their self-image, but the fixed perception of their fans. People like to think of their heroes as geniuses and infallible, right? So speaking of, let's watch Picasso paint. This is a documentary that was made by a friend of his that got to capture his process while he was painting. So he was in the studio with Picasso, capturing the moment after every major change to the photo. So now watch the legs. This is a bullfighter. Look at the legs on the bullfighter on the left side. One leg down, one leg up. Now the top leg just went up. He's going to paint over that with the cape. Paint the cape red. Hide all evidence that it used to have both legs going down. Now on the right-hand side, look at his 2 hands. The one hand on the sword is open, and the hand facing forward is closed. Changes his mind, the hand on the sword closes, the hand facing forward opens, Now watch the legs in green. He's going to change his mind. Top leg is going to go down. Oh, actually, I love this. The bull's head. Imagine he's looking at this going, hey man, I'm the council. I can do better. So, okay, now look at the legs are going down. He's going to cover that up with the cape. Now, I think that watching this process and the mistakes is a lot more encouraging than just seeing a finished product. This is why you should never compare your inside to someone else's outside. We see all the mistakes in ourselves, but we only see others' final product. But if more of us would show the world our mistakes and our sweaty working process, we'd actually be doing everyone a big favor. So, the fixed mindset versus growth mindset makes all the difference in the world. Now, the third reason why you need to fail is for experiments. This is the quantity. Here's what I mean. In music school, I took singing lessons. I had this great teacher where I would bring in a song and he'd say, okay, sing it to me the way you wrote it. So I would sing it, start to finish. Radio and TV shows taught her everything she knows. So I'd sing the whole song like that. He'd say, all right, now do it up an octave. I'd say, up an octave? What do you mean? I can't sing that high. He'd say, I don't care. Go. Do it. I'd say, radio and TV shows taught her everything she knows. It sounded terrible. But by the end of 3 minutes of doing that, I'll admit that I tried some things that I wouldn't have tried otherwise. It gives you a new perspective on what you're doing. But they'd say, okay, now do it down an octave. I'd say, but I can't sing that low. He'd say, I don't care, try, go. Radio and TV shows, taught her everything she knows. Then he'd say, okay, now do it double speed. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Radio and TV shows, taught her everything she knows. Also, I had to focus on my enunciation and phrasing. Then he'd say, okay, now do it half speed. 1, 2, 3, 4. And all of a sudden, when you're singing a song half speed, you have to really focus on where you take your breaths, and you find all these kind of nuances of space between the words, and how you can use that. So, then he'd even have me do some other things, like, okay, now sing it to me like Tom Waits would. Now sing it like you're Mick Jagger. That's it, stand up, prance around the room like Mick Jagger. Do it right, come on. So he'd run me through all these experiments. When it was all done, he'd say, okay, now how did the first original go again? And I'll admit that after trying all these different ways, it made me realize that the first thing I did was just yet another experiment. It was an awesome reminder that everything we do is just one option. Everything is an experiment. So the question for you is, which one of these versions was a failure? None, obviously, right? It's a silly question. There is no such thing as failure if everything is just an experiment. So one last story to tie this all together. A ceramics teacher announced on opening day that he was dividing the class into 2 groups. Everyone on the left side only needed to make 1 pot all semester, and that 1 pot would be graded on its perfection. Everyone on the right side would be graded only by weight. He said, I don't care what you make, on the final day, I'm going to bring in my bathroom scale and we're just going to weigh it. Over 50 pounds of pots gets you an A, over 40 pounds gets you a B, 30 pounds a C, etc. I don't even care what it is, I'm not even going to look at it, just weigh it. Go. So, at the end of the semester, there was a surprising result. The works of the highest quality, when an outside observer was watching at the end of the class, were all the ones that were made by the quantity group, those that were being judged only on weight. So it seems that while this quantity group was busy just churning out piles of work and learning from their mistakes, the quality group, the one that was being judged just on 1 pot, had sat there theorizing about perfection, and in the end had nothing but grandiose theories and 1 mediocre pot. So we all have these perfectionist tendencies. So making mistakes and failing is a great way to break that paralysis. And in the end, apparently, it makes better work anyway. So, 3 big reasons why you need to fail. Number 1, it's required for learning. Number 2, it keeps you in the growth mindset. And number 3, it reminds you that everything is just an experiment. In musical terms, instead of thinking classical music, think jazz, where there's this great saying, if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. And lastly, it's a lot more fun. My name's Derek Simmons. I hope this was enjoyable. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
As an experiment. So, Well, it is true that it takes a long time to become a software craftsman, just like it might take a long time for you to become an excellent entrepreneur or business guy. But the key thing is to split your 10,000 hours, whether you are improving your marketing skills, whether you're improving your iOS development skill, whether you're improving your web app development skill, into very small bits, and just do each bit and improve and stretch your limit a little for each project. So that's one little advantage I had over the past 4 years working on many different small projects, including my own experiments, many of which failed. And all this learning will essentially help with your muscle memory. So if you ask me to open up a Vim editor, I practice and I make so many mistakes on the Vim editor that I'm so familiar with a lot of shortcuts. And basically keep practicing. I'm relatively new to iOS, but I know that as long as I keep practicing and I keep releasing small little apps, I know I'll get there sometime. So Peter Novick says, get interested. These are the few rules. He wrote this long blog post, 21 days or something. And it talks about the key points that you should have, right, in order to improve your software craftsmanship. We're going to get into the code very soon after this, but I'm going to translate this into what you should look at when you are doing iOS. Right? This is generic software in general. Get interested, program, talk with other programmers, work with other programmers, whether you're doing pair programming or whether you're just working in the context of the same code base, work with other programmers. Work after other programmers. What that means is that someone has written a software and you don't actually know how that software developer wrote it. Take it in, read it, understand why he did it a certain way. Some might be mistakes, you might be even cursing and swearing. Why is he writing it in a particular way? But the key point is to understand why he did that. It might be a mistake, but you could even learn from someone else's mistake. And learn at least 6 languages if you want to be a software developer as a career. At least 6, like JavaScript, Python, PHP, a few parallel type languages like Scala, Golang, just go at it. And once you start to learn different languages, you actually understand the different perspectives that the language designers have when they design the language. Over the past 4 years, I've picked up a little bit of JavaScript, I've picked up PHP, Python. I use the jQuery framework primarily for JavaScript-related work. I've learned Bash because I have to do a system administration. It's not really a language, is it? But hey, Bash. And right now, I'm doing iOS. I'm also trying to expand my horizons by learning Golang, which is a parallel programming language. So I'm still new at all this, and I'm trying to keep learning. So the other thing, of course, is to understand computer instruction. Well, the software is one part of it. Understand what you do in the software and how it impacts the performance on the hardware that you're developing on. When you're developing on an iOS device, the paradigm is completely different because you're talking about a 256 MB device for the older generation iPhones, 512 MB. So you can't use the same paradigm like what you do on server-side programming where you can just throw machine at a problem. You can't. You need to manage your memory carefully, which is why Objective-C makes a lot more sense than JavaScript. It's possible to do simple apps with JavaScript, but if you want to have a good experience for your users as your business starts to scale up, it completely makes sense to go Objective-C. So understand all this, learn about language standardization, why they are standardizing the language in a particular way, and then quickly get out of it, because it doesn't help you, but you need to learn it, but you need to get out of it. So I will translate it to what we are going to talk about, and we'll be diving into code very soon. So read a lot of blog posts. There are a whole bunch of resources that you'll see later in the slides that I provide you with. I'm going to upload this slide to public domain, so if you guys want the links, you can just grab it off my slides later on. And download and play with other people's iOS apps. Right? When you start developing and you're completely new to it, you need to completely decouple yourself from the web framework mindset or the HTML mindset. It's quite different. So you need to understand how transitions happen in your iOS app. You need to understand how touch is completely different from clicking on a screen with a mouse. And of course, locally, there's this very active group which I'm also active in. I ask questions and I try to learn a lot of stuff from senior programmers in that group, iOS Dev Scout. It's a very interesting mix of people there. Some doing their own startups, some are indie programmers doing their own lifestyle little iPhone apps. So go join the group and talk to people there. It's critical to just ask questions, whether it's to your colleague or to just another programmer in general. Of course, you can also use Stack Overflow, but generally, if you're asking a more generic type programming question, a community group is better. For very specific technical questions, Stack Overflow is better. So if there are hackathons, go join in, learn something, and look at open source projects. Moongroove, one of the guys running this iOS Dev Scout, he has pretty good open source library. So go check out his source code and read them. And also learn at least some of these languages, which gives you an idea of why they are different from Objective-C. C is like the mother of all languages. Before that, there are some other, but C there was a split in the school of thought on how C can become object-oriented. Smalltalk and Objective-C split into one branch, and C++, Java essentially went into the other branch. The contemporary scripting languages like Ruby and Python inherit a lot of what the C++ and Java paradigm has. Yeah, of course, for the case of Python, I'm biased. It has all the good points only, and none of the bad points. I'm kidding. So, read best practices, learn programming methodologies. Go and find out why people do XP. XP stands for Extreme Programming, where it's another word for pair programming. TDD means test-driven development, how you write tests. For iOS apps, you don't necessarily have to write a lot of tests because it's very UI-driven, and unit tests are harder on anything that is UI-driven. For example, on a web app, you can use something like Selenium to automate your workflow, right? To pretend that you're a user, log in, click on this, click on that, and expect certain results, right? Check out Selenium if you do web development professionally. I use that a little bit, but not so much as to cover my whole project, because whenever your UI changes, you have to change your Selenium test as well. And that is a huge overhead. So if you're in a bigger team where you have such a resource to fully automate your UI testing, by all means, go ahead. So you need to understand why certain methodologies are being used in certain software teams and why they have the ability to use it. And in your context, are you able to adopt the same practices? You need to be very contextually aware when you make certain decisions. And to be able to make such good decisions, you need to read up on all this and understand why. CI stands for continuous integration. Very web-driven type of kind of methodology where different team members, their source code will be merged automatically, and it will be built automatically by a CI server to check that all the unit tests pass. If something has failed, you'll see a red button on your CI software telling you that you have broken something. Right? CD is a more sophisticated form of CI, very advanced. And of course, start to practice UI UX. You don't necessarily have time to do everything, so it's important for you to seek out people who are experts in a certain field and work with them. And just repeat the process. As you go along your first year, your second year as a programmer, your third year as a programmer, you'll just get better if you keep repeating this process. So now we begin diving in a bit into the technicalities of Objective-C and iOS. So for those who are completely new to this, Objective-C is nothing but a superset of C. Right? Together with Smalltalk, as I mentioned earlier, it is a branch, it is a different way of looking at how OOP should be done compared to C++ or Java. Right? So message passing is the paradigm that they use, and compared to method calls, which you will be familiar with if you use the contemporary languages, or if you're familiar with C and C++. Those are method calls. And a common pattern that you see in iOS apps will be this concept called delegation. You need to understand delegation if you are to do any iOS development. It's the first thing you need to do, delegation. Just like if you understand OOP, the first thing you need to know is, wait, inheritance, of course. Right? Inherit a particular class to a subclass, override certain methods to do whatever custom thing that you need to do in your subclass. That's the standard paradigm for the C, C++, Java branch of things. Delegation is very unique to iOS, and essentially what it means in humanly understandable way is that instead of subclassing a parent class given to you by Apple, you essentially grab certain functionality from protocols, right? They call it protocols. You grab certain functionality from a group of functions called protocol, plug it into an existing class, and then you have those special functions that comes from the protocol. And then you can delegate back, you can make your controller the delegate of all these functions. That's essentially delegation. Okay, so that's the concept. So what does that actually mean? Okay, technically the difference between message passing and calling a method is in the linking. Everything is done at compile time for the C, C++, Java paradigm. Right, you link it and the function is basically available. Okay, so that's the key part. For Objective-C and Smalltalk, you cannot guarantee what will be run until runtime. When the program is actually running, then you actually determine, hey, are we implementing this function or not? If it doesn't implement it, the class will usually either forward the message onto another object or just throw an exception. I think Suk mentioned something about this just now, about being able to inject stuff from other programs because of these characteristics of Objective-C. Overall, a message is the same thing like calling a method, except that the runtime finds the exact function to be called. Okay, so this is something that you just need to be conceptually aware of. And then the next thing that you need to know is to be aware of how the function names are being written. Okay? I'll show you an example later on, but Objective-C functions look very weird. They are broken up into parts. Okay? The normal function that we get when we are writing our contemporary is just a name, it's just a function name. But in Objective-C function, it's split into one or many parts. So it's a bit weird at first, but once you get used to this weird way of naming a function, you'll get along just fine. Okay, so this thing about delegation. Why does iOS use delegation? Because delegation is something that facilitates this concept called composition, where you can compose an object together by taking different parts of code, pre-written by Apple or by yourself. You can compose it together and do something you like. So you depend essentially on an expert to do it. So that's what it means delegate. You give it to another special class or special protocol that's written specifically for the purpose, and let that expert function or class do it. We don't really, and in the standard paradigm that we know as subclassing, we are doing an inheritance, but you end up getting methods that you may not necessarily want in your subclass. So iOS delegates it, so it will never inherit some extra stuff that you don't want. So this is how iOS app wants you to do it. It is possible to do delegation in C++. Right? I had a long discussion with Chit-Mei last night. But I did a bit more reading, and apparently delegation makes sense when what you're doing is a service. Like you're giving your data to a specific lexer or parser or printer to do something very specialized. Otherwise, what you usually do is you just subclass, change the certain behavior that you want, and move on. Okay, and this guy was teaching me a bit more about that, Don Han. Okay, so this is how it looks like schematically. We'll get to the code very soon. Built-in iOS object, your custom object, and then you can become the delegate. You say that I promise to implement whatever the built-in iOS object says. I promise to implement it. Then you become the delegate. So here's how it looks like. This is a pre-written pre-written protocol. It's not a class. Pre-written protocol, which will become a delegate. Pre-written protocol by Apple, right? It's call location. Call location is the framework that allows you to call your GPS and determine your location, your Wi-Fi, your GPS and determine your location, compute your location for you. So this is pre-written. If you open up the header files in Apple's SDK, you will be, and you do a quick search, you'll actually be able to find this particular file. The file name is actually the same name as the class, which is CL location manager delegate.h. Okay, this is your own code, right? This is written by Apple. Ah, I'm done. What, really? Sorry. I will try to wrap this up very quickly. And then you essentially inherit, get the functionality available here, right? By specifying it in angle brackets. So this is your own custom controller code. And right, this is where you will promise to implement it. This is just your own header file, your custom code and your own header file. And this is where you begin to implement your own header file, which is called current location view controller. And this is where you do your delegation. And this is actually where you call that function, where you implement that original pre-written Apple header. Right? This is what was provided, and this is the function. Right? That's what I mean when I tell you that iOS functions are weird. The whole thing is a function. Location manager did update to location from location. That's the function name. It's split up by the colons, and the CL location manager instance is given to it. So it looks weird if you come from contemporary languages. Okay? And just a refresher, this is where our original screen is. This is the pre-written code. So in iOS, there's not much use cases for subclassing. We have to think in terms of composing functionality and delegation to specialize pre-written code. So these are some resources that are available. So I have to eat my own dog food. I believe in this concept of iterating and doing a lot of experiments. And this is some open source code that you can go grab. Right? If you want to, just go grab it, experiment with it. I've made mistakes in it, I have 2 gig commits in it. So just check it out, it's completely open source. Go download it. And the last one isn't open source. The last one is something that I intended to submit to the App Store. And this was done during the iOS Dev Scout hackathon a while ago. So these are some of the people that I've learned from, right? I advocate the concept of talking to a lot of people and learning from them. This is some of the few fellas that I've learned from. I'm very grateful for the help. And of course, many folks from the community called iOS Dev Scout.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are a lot of methodologies that you should acquaint yourself with, but at the heart of it all, learn programming. Okay? And be like water. Don't get set into one form. Adapt it. Build your own style. Grow it. And yeah, just understand where different people are coming from when they design a specific language, when they design a specific framework. I don't really like the debates about whether Android is better or iOS is better. If my business requires it, I'm going to build an Android app. If my business requires it, I'm going to build an iOS app. It's as simple as that. So, last promotion, and that's it. Thanks for bearing with me. There's an iOS conference, so if you want to learn more about iOS and do some programming, go join this conference. Yeah. That's all. Thank you.